Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Many of us have been active feminists since the 70s or even some 60s, from the 1960s. We were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis. Janice Raymond wrote The Transsexual Empire in 1979, and many of us have a very, very similar analysis. So this is not a new, surprising issue to us radical feminists. And indeed, we, the radical feminists, have been targeted from the start by trans rights activists in the name TERF, Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. So we've been around a long time, and Bernadette, who does the tech here, has a very good idea. She was saying that we haven't changed our position, and because our position is quite close to the truth, and so we were thinking we should be called truth expounding radical feminists. But it's true that we did not change our position, and certainly not since 2018, when WDI wrote the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which lays out our position about the threats posed by gender identity ideology. It's been signed by 39,707 people from 160 countries and is supported by 547 organisations. You can join our work on defending women's sex-based rights through the WDI website. We'll put it up in the chat, and it's on the YouTube if you're watching later. This is a women-only webinar. If you're a man, please leave immediately, and you can watch it later on YouTube. It will be up on YouTube on Wednesday, so you can watch it there. I've got a couple of bits of news. The ministry in Germany has been funding and hiding their funding of unlawful funding of NGOs. So I'm just going to read this little bit. Only after legal pressure did the now CDU and CSU, those are the right-wing parties, led Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth grant access to documents concerning NGO funding from 2020 to 2024. These documents reveal that this organisation funded the German Women's Council and organisations it supported, contradicting the constitutional mandate to promote gender equality. Using taxpayer money, this Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth undermines their legally binding international conventions on the rights of women, even the entire government's gender equality strategy. And it deliberately concealed the unlawful funding of NGOs and used it to implement party political goals of the SPD and the Greens. So I'll put that in the chat so you can see about that. That seems to be a typical modus operandi of many governments to fund the non-governmental organisations who are promoting trans rights ideology and then pretend they didn't do it by hiding and obfuscating. Three other things to mention. The UK Women's Institute have stopped allowing men who say they are women to join as if they were women. And so any of us who our main aim really was to be in the WI can now leave WDI and go back to the WI because they actually are women. But of course, we want to actually go further than just the WDI and making jam and the things they do, which is the Women's Institute. It's not very political. We want to overthrow patriarchy, so it's best to stay in WDI. Also, the UK Girl Guides have stopped allowing boys who say they are girls to join as if they were girls. So that's fantastic. So both of those two campaigns, we have had women on who have been affected by this and have been campaigning on this issue. And because following the Supreme Court ruling in the UK, these organisations have had to change tack. Now, last thing I wanted to mention is Sonia Poulton made a good video, which is, I would say it's worth watching. It's called How Transgenderism Impacted the UK. She's a very, very long-standing, efficient, good journalist, and has interviewed a lot of different actors on our side on the struggle against transgender ideology. But she does just to warn you, she does go along quite heavily with the idea of these gender critical therapist model that children who are unhappy with gender, instead of saying they want to, we want to get rid of gender and overthrow patriarchy, she is quite happy to frame it as children are unhappy with their gender and they need just therapy without drugs, and then they'll be happy with their gender. And she sort of reveals that in her persona by performing the feminine gender very like big time. So I would say it's a bit annoying, her framing of the issue, but it is a good video. And the other thing is that's irritating, but as always, we're used to it. She mentions pretty much every group in the UK that's fighting gender identity ideology, but not WDI. And she ends up on the big screen saying, showing TERF, and says it means trans exclusionary radical feminist. And then she immediately says, I'm not a radical feminist, I'm not a feminist. But anybody standing up for women's rights is labeled a TERF. So she recognizes somehow that in this battle, everybody's being labeled a radical feminist, but she wants to make very clear that she is not one of them. And I suppose she made it clear partly in her video by not interviewing us about the struggle. Anyway, finally, the last thing I want to say is something sad, is that Twiz Butler passed away last week, and she was a devoted, long-time radical feminist and a great supporter of WDI. And she came particularly in the first couple of years since 2020. She came along to our webinars very often and was actively sort of helpful and involved with us. So that's a shame. Right. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about our program today. Our program today is Alex Preußner from Germany. She's going to tell us about why she signed the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. And then Lauren from USA, and her talk is called Peaking to Patriarchy and Trans Harms. And then we're going to hear from Kara Dansky, why the history of a movement is important, and possibly another couple of things about the Supreme Court, some other interesting stuff from Kara. So welcome everybody, and do chat as always and put questions in the chat as we go. So we're going to start off hearing from Alex Preußner. She is a woman, mother, lesbian, abolitionist and counsellor for people with disabilities, currently not with any organisation. So welcome, Alex. And I guess the reason you're here is you very kindly said you come and tell us why you signed the declaration. So, Owen, you're muted, which we asked you to mute. So thanks. So yeah, welcome. And you're from Germany. Can you tell us about why you signed the declaration, and then we chat about other stuff?
Hey, Joe, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, why did I sign the declaration? Because it said everything I believe to be true for women. And I'm always wondering why not more women are signing that, or why so many women are not feminists. I mean, that's us. We are women and we have our rights taken away. We have little to begin with. And I don't know, it was just normal to sign it when I found it.
Yeah. How did you find it?
Oh, I think through the Lesbian Spring Conference in 21. Yeah, must
In
be that. Yeah,
Yeah, in Germany. And was
in
that,
Germany. Yeah,
yeah, and were there some people from WDI, or were just people chatting about women chatting about it?
yeah, I think so. It's some years back, and there was a huge program over the whole weekend. So I think Susanne Bischoff
Yeah,
from the Lesbian Action Center. I think
yeah,
it was her who mentioned it, but I'm not quite sure.
yeah. And so what do you find that you were saying not many women seem to be sort of understanding about how to stand up for our own rights? Do you find that you meet quite a few women in Germany who seem to be oblivious to this whole issue or to women's rights.
Yes, definitely. When I look at my colleagues, I'm in a social organization. I'm meeting lots of social workers, social pedagogues. You know, we are from all kinds of things, from childcare to people with disability, to care for seniors, and everyone is told to be kind and to be all inclusive, and even to a degree where it harms them. But it's so ingrained into our training, like you must include everyone, and you can't say that's a man when everything in you tells you it is, but you're not allowed to say it because be kind. That's a mantra.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of women outside from this bubble are oblivious because they have their own strife. They are not interested in politics. They're just working, doing childcare, caring for their parents. They're just it has become quite difficult. You have a lot of tasks as a woman, and so not many are that political. It's
yeah.
sad.
And would you say, I mean, would you, because Germany is quite like a very rich country with quite good
Mm-hmm,
social security. So there's always been some sort of, I suppose, economic position that women have in Germany. Although I mean, my experience is that women in Germany, there's more pressure to be a mother and, and possibly to be kind, to be that because you had something like 2 years maternity leave, and so there was that
mm-hmm.
role modeling of motherhood. Is that still around?
Not so much. I mean, the I think we are at an average of 1.4 children per family. Um, Many young women don't want children, especially with the threat of war and everything that's going on right now, economical instability. Um, there are certain environments where I'd say, yes, it's still the old ways, like the new party, the AfD, they want to put women back on the hearth and in
Yeah.
the house, and that's a trend. But I think the majority of young, well-educated women are not looking at being a full-time mother. Quite the opposite. It's expected that you work, that you maintain yourself, that you earn money. You can't live on one wage alone anymore. So yeah, most women work at least part-time, but many work full-time.
Yeah. So, well, that's interesting. So maybe the be kind has become in, say, in the workplace, in social
Mm-hmm,
services, and it's transmitted. Women's role is to be kind in the workplace and maybe at bars and clubs and in changing rooms,
mm-hmm,
be kind to men.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
That real imperative. Yeah. And so would you so would you say most of the women you work with would be going along with transgender ideology?
not all. I've met a few who said, well, that's BS. You know, it's especially those who are disabled. They have a very clear idea about their bodies and who they are. Um, my immediate colleagues, yes, they would go along. My boss, I'd say she knows it's not right, but she wouldn't say anything against politics, you know. And my immediate colleagues, no, they're totally um, like when I have a client who's trans identifying, we get that, especially young women, totally messed up on testosterone. And when I'm talking about them, I can't help myself. When I'm talking about them to my colleagues, I usually say she, because that's a young woman for me. Everything tells me so. And my colleague would always go, no, it's he. you
Oh,
know.
well, yeah.
So, and when I said, no, that's a girl on drugs, and they're destroying her. I can't say he. That's not that's not what it is. And she said, oh, you, and but she doesn't want to discuss me because I think she feels she has no argument, but she's always, yeah,
So so it's the sort of, they want you to use the pronouns, but they
yes,
don't want to then
yes,
go into the discussion
right, yeah,
about it. Yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. Um, and you said so some of the disabled colleagues, and
Mhm.
you work particularly with people with disabilities, is that correct?
Yes, yes,
And
I'm a peer counselor. That means I have my own disability, and I'm counseling people on applying for help, applying for assistance, changes in the workplace, that kind of thing. And so I have quite we are a type of counseling service. We had a big change in disability laws in 2017, and then the government, in a moment of clarity, thought we must tell the people how that works, and they put up these counseling services. But it's a bit difficult. I'm not a direct employee of the state, but we get our money from there. We're
yeah.
like state funded. So yeah, I'm yeah, that's what we do. And so we have lots of disabled employees because that was a condition that you have peers to talk to people.
Yeah, that's great. And are you saying that the disabled peers are more likely to be skeptical about gender identity ideology?
Yes, not all. We have some that are indoctrinated, but they are very young. The elder ones, they know. They know how discriminated they are as a woman, sorry, as a disabled person. Um, they've experienced that, and they know very well where it's coming from. That it's their sex and not any idea about it. And yes, the older ones are definitely critical.
So you're sort of saying, to some extent, I think, are you saying that if you know what discrimination is, you understand the concept of it, but and it's in your own life, you know that you're being discriminated as a woman, then you can see that this gender identity could be a problem. Or you realize it's because of sex that you're discriminated against. Or is
I
this
think
yeah, something else?
No, I think that's it. I mean, as a disabled person, you're always, especially if it's visible, you're always discriminated against.
Yeah,
People will never take you fully seriously. But as a disabled woman, you're not even seen as a woman.
yeah.
And so you know it's about sex, it's about who you are. It's not about some idea, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's really interesting, and because we haven't really sort of discussed that on WDI, and that's a really, I mean, in a way, it's encouraging that that your colleagues, some of your colleagues, are seeing what's going on, and I mean, the final thing, and we'll come back to you, or there might be, if
Okay.
there are any questions. Um, for Alex, can you put them in the Q&A right now? I haven't really been reading the chat, so I can't really see any questions. But um, yeah, I suppose my final question would be, what do you think? How do you think it's going in Germany? Is it terrible in terms of the law and everything?
uh, well, um, it's it has it has gotten more difficult, definitely, with the penalties and everything. And I'm always, I think it's so funny that we're always uh, making the mistakes other countries have already made, and we're not looking at that. And I'm still in German, I'm still answering the same stupid questions I've answered in English 10 years ago, like um, I think it's a bit on the decline. In the first year, now we have self-ID. Many people changed sex, but we also have perpetrators who use the law, like one right-wing criminal who declared himself to be a woman, and just to mess things up. And I think people see that. People understand that that law can be misused and that it's not a good idea to do it like that. And CDU and CSU promised to take it back, which they haven't so far. I don't know what's going to happen. There's we have the prostitution law revision ongoing. So there's lots of things that need to change, but at the moment I'm not seeing who would do it. You know,
Yeah.
the right wing parties have promised it, but they're not moving really. I think
Yeah.
they're afraid they're losing the last of their voters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And there's a question from here from Aralia. Um, is it true that in Germany unemployed women can be required to work in a brothel because they are now legalized?
No, no, definitely not. Um, that was the fear when the law changed, but no, you can't. Just like you can't ask somebody to do a dangerous job they are not prepared for.
Great.
The other way around, if a woman works in prostitution and needs additional aid, she can get that, but she can't be forced to work in a brothel.
Brilliant. That's that because that was quite a myth in
Mhm.
I've heard quite a few times
Yeah,
that if you're unemployed you wouldn't get your benefits if you refuse that. That's very
no, no, no,
positive. Well, it's
no. I
still
think that
terrible.
they have offered jobs in nightclubs to women, like serving at the bar.
Yeah.
That happens. But again, if someone says, I feel like don't feel comfortable in such an environment, you can't force anyone to
Yeah.
take a particular job. And
Brilliant.
there's always ways out, like when you say, oh, I have a small child, I can't work nights or whatever, they can't do that. So
Yeah.
no, definitely not as a prostitute.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, let's round up now. Have you got anything else you'd like to share with the women here?
Not at the moment.
No. And
So
if you stay around, we'll get back together.
I will. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, it's lovely to talk to you, and thank you so much for sharing and hearing from you in Germany. It's so important that we meet internationally like this. Really good news. We at the UN Laws Group, which is a group that meets every week for 30 minutes on Tuesdays, if you want to come along, if you're interested in international law. We had Megan Blake from Australia came and got back in touch. She's been busy because she's been developing her career as a barrister and other things. And the great thing she has done that has worked is she has set up a legal fund in Australia, which has got charitable status to raise money for the defense of women's sex-based rights, women who are attacked, lose their jobs, or are discriminated against because of their views on gender identity ideology. And she's going to come next year to tell us about that. And I think that's a really massive step forward because in Australia, as we know, they are sort of behind Turf Island or United States, various other places. So that's very good. When we're talking about the UN Laws Group, I'll just mention that we are also doing some work on the CEDAW committee, which are the women's committee in the United Nations who are looking at how countries implement CEDAW. And as we know, many of them are undermining CEDAW because of gender identity ideology. Anyway, this group is really dodgy about promoting the idea that a woman includes men who say they're women. And there's a lot of grayness around what their statements are. Anyway, Janet Robin, from New Zealand, the New Zealand country contact, is going to do a talk on that. If you know anything about that, you can send it to info@womensdeclaration.com. We'll pass it on to her because we really want to have more clarity around that, and we can work together to make that clarity. Then the last thing is we're going to try and do a side event at the CSW in March. It will be an online side event, and we'll try and do it through the New York CSW NGO committee. But seeing as they think we're much too naughty, and have wrongthink, it's probable we'll just have to do it individually on our own. But anyway, just so everybody knows, we are keeping on top of that. Okay, so we're going to now move on to Lauren. Lauren is a 40-year-old woman living in the mountains. She spent many years as an accounting and finance professional, now homeschooling her 3 kids and running a small business. Lauren is a wolf sister in action, and she loves hiking, yoga, and cats. And your sort of talk is, we're calling it peaking to patriarchy and trans harms. And so, yeah, so I suppose let's start off with what do you mean by peaking to patriarchy and trans harms, and why did you sign the declaration? Oh, and you're still, asked to unmute. I have to press that.
Great.
Should work
Okay.
now. Great.
Yeah, so I peaked to patriarchy before I realized what was going on in with trans ideology. And when I say peak to patriarchy, I think um, most women don't understand how patriarchy has influenced the trajectory of their lives. Especially, I think heterosexual women groomed. I mean, I think we're all groomed in childhood, but especially the women likely to partner with men, continue to be groomed and under the guise of, say, like romance and relationships with men. And it just, once I realized the relationship issues I was having were really abuse, did I really realize like how long I had been groomed to accept this sort of male behavior. And then I also see the same patterns in these guys pretending to be women, how they abuse their partners. It's all so very similar. And if we weren't in patriarchy, there's just I can't imagine that this would have ever gotten as far as it has or existed at all. So once I realized what was going on in my relationship, I looked for an organization that was out there to peak women and to end patriarchy, and that's when I found WDI. And I didn't sign the declaration right away. I was more focused on looking for a specific organization I could join to like do outreach. And I didn't realize exactly what was going on with trans. It wasn't a part of my life. Again, I homeschooled. I wasn't on social media. I lived in Texas. It just wasn't in my life. And so I was more focused on the patriarchy side of it. And I didn't see the links until a few years ago. Um, so yeah, I think what we were talking about earlier, I think if women and girls understood our history more, our intimate history with men through patriarchy, how we're abused and used, I think would really stop patriarchy in its tracks, if we could really get to the next generation. So that's where I still would like to see, and maybe someone can let me know of an organization that also does direct work trying to reach girls and young women, that might partner with men to really, we all need an education on our women's history. I mean, I think what gets focused on, at least in US schools, for women's history is specifically women who have sort of broken through patriarchy and made advancements, made things that men have recognized as important. And we don't learn about the actual everyday struggles that women have gone through, our abuse and our harms that have been at the hands of men. And obviously in patriarchy, they get to create the narrative. So I would, just, I guess one of my motivations for being here today is try to just bring more of an emphasis to the need to educate girls and young women to what will likely be the pattern in their relationships. I was partnered with a man who's actually a therapist, and so through his training, I know he was not trained to view relationship issues as patterned abuse. And we've worked together for like the last 5 years to figure out what went on with our relationship, and to, he's thus changed the way he even does therapy, and he can see it. It's patterned in all the couples he treats, the individuals he sees. It's the same things over and over again. Male entitlement, and just, the way that they choose to abuse us,
Yeah.
and how
I mean,
society trains them to and grooms us into it.
I've been watching and listening to lots about the Epstein child sex abuse and Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell as well, stories, and which really, really talk about exactly how the many, many, many girls were groomed and sort of entrapped and then sexually abused. And I think at the end of all of these videos, because there's so many videos out about it and it gets on mainstream media a bit, they should say, right, in order to protect your children against this, they should come to the Wolf summer camp, which is going to be on next summer,
Hmm.
the Wolf in the forest, and similar things. We're WDI, we're doing a conference in London, but I mean, in a bigger picture, there should be state-sponsored training for young women and girls
Yeah. I
in
mean, yeah,
absolutely how to avoid all of this. But the thing is, if they did train them, that would overthrow patriarchy, wouldn't it? Because if they
yes,
actually said,
exactly.
this is what's happening, so because they are patriarchy,
I
unfortunately,
mean,
they're
look,
not going to do it.
they got trans ideology in school, but we can't talk about women's abuse. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, but okay, so jumping backwards, how did you just exactly, so you were there, it possibly not particularly in the feminist loop. Did you sort of Google, or what, how did you find, and I guess did you find Wolf or did you find WDI? And another question is, WDI isn't very totally explicitly saying on our websites we want to overthrow patriarchy. But anyway, do you see that? How did you see that?
Yeah, it was just Googling, yeah, organizations geared toward dismantling patriarchy was, what I Googled. And I think I found Wolf and WDI around the same time. This was probably maybe 4 years ago. And I still was looking for, I think, something with, I don't know, like something that I kind of identified with women that like were having similar experiences as me. And that's when not till this year, joined Wolf. And then after hearing Lauren Levy speak at the summer camp, I went back and signed the declaration. Um, but I can't say exactly why at that time. It just, something didn't quite speak to me, like what I was interested in directly doing with women. I think I thought maybe there would be an organization that was like, okay, we work to reach young,
Mm.
heterosexual or bisexual women, and we work to help them see patterns of male behavior, male entitlement. So I think that's probably why I didn't sign at the time. And honestly, I'm not even sure that I realized there was something for me to sign. I was just reading the declaration and agreeing with it, but also looking for a place to expend my time and energy specifically. Um,
I mean, one of the things is that WDI, as I said in the intro, we wrote the declaration, not me, but the WDI, a lot, Sheila Jeffries and Maureen O'Hara wrote, and Heather Brunskill Evans was helping as well. Um, but so WDI at that time wrote the declaration, and we set up the organization WDI in order to promote the declaration. And to some extent, the declaration is aimed at international law. That's what we keep on doing this. Oh, we want to change the law in different countries. We want to stop self-ID. Um, and the actual focus that you're talking about of us reaching young women and helping them escape from patriarchy sort of ideologically and then to live a better life, to be able to get through. And we have never really done a lot of work on, but we've been talking, I mean, I've been talking to a couple of women in WDI about doing that because it is really needed, and perhaps we should have a part of the international website being much more explicit about that, because we've got loads of good videos and we've got loads of radical feminist women or great women who could help lead young women out of some of the traps they're in. And I guess you could do it as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that most women, when they do realize what's gone on or they find WDI or wolf, it's kind of too late to make a big impact to maybe their children, the next generation, because they've probably been raising their kids in a patriarchal home for years, and the boys are patterned to the husband's behavior, and the girls are groomed into thinking this is normal. So at some point, I also see sort of a lack of outreach to mothers with young children, and I think that's a place where we could really make a big impact.
Yeah. And I mean, that's interesting as well. I mean, I always think, oh, I'm going to do things and then I never end up having time. But that's something that if we did do that, it is possible that sometimes some government might fund us to do some of that work because they recognize sexual abuse of women and girls being groomed. And we're in a very good position to be able to do it. So possibly we could try and get actual state funding, which at the end of the day, we would like to get funding to do the work of women's liberation rather than the trans get funding to do the work of undermining women's rights. Um, yeah, so how did you do it then? Did you sort of work your way out bit by bit?
Yeah, I went through, I think, kind of like a merry-go-round of, bullshit really with my husband, and eventually realizing, wow, like actually every friend that I have that's married is going through this too. My female relatives, my female coworkers, and realizing, oh, okay, this is organized. This is by plan, and realizing, okay, there's, I kind of view it as like a pyramid of patriarchy, that there's, the powerful, wealthy men, the media, the religious leaders at the top, and all the sort of the middlemen underneath them. And then there's the women and children underneath them. And the boys, I think are really important. They're the ones who are the only ones who are going to be advancing up. And I think if we can get to the children and young women, then we could really just end patriarchy. And I think women and young girls they're just not aware of it. I think that they see a lot of heterosexual women in particular see feminists as man haters or bitter, but a lot of us are mothers, and we have boys, and we know that they're not horrible people, but something happens, something systematic. As they grow older, they get influenced by older men in the system, and they do turn into abusers, and not
Yeah.
and we're also trained to see it as like, well, it's not physical abuse or threatening or violence. No, like most women, at least I think in the United States, are being abused through other tactics. It's not that he's going to hit you.
Yeah. And maybe and manufacturing consent of our consent to our oppression. That's a massive thing, isn't it? I mean, it seems to be, in the Epstein thing, there's this pyramid of getting young girls to come and be sexually abused, and um, it it seems that some women well, definitely bought into their role within the system, that they had this sexual abuse system, and some women who are either very poor or narcissistic psychopaths, like it seemed people are saying Ghislaine Maxwell was, and whatever else was going on in terms of her businesses. Um, Women also have this equal opportunity to become patriarchs, it seems like they can participate in the patriarchy. And what I see as really worrying is that in public life, particularly, but maybe in every bit of life, that girls are taught we've got equal opportunity now to be patriarchal. So you don't have to be a boy to be patriarchal, you can be a girl. And then you do get some of the benefits because you're being this handmaiden
Some
thing, which
power,
is
yeah.
yeah. So there's a thing of sort of reminding or teaching girls not you don't have to go along with this, and you don't need to be a victim, but also don't send other girls to this peril.
Just the awareness and being able to recognize, abuse when it's happening, and the system itself enabling it.
Yeah. So that's really good that you found out all about this and everything. And you've linked up really with Wolf and being an activist. So how are you finding that? Is that helping with, your learning stuff and enjoying it?
Yeah, definitely. I went to the summer camp this year and it was a great experience connecting with other women, and the history that they taught there was just great. And it's really obviously it's missing from mainstream education and from women's lives.
Yeah.
And it's eye-opening.
Yeah. And Leah Keith has said she'll come and talk to us about do an advert for the RadFem summer camp. So that would be great. So we can get that. I'll get I can see Leah's in the chat. Let's get Leah to come and tell us about that. And then maybe we can use that as an advert for women coming. And that gives me an idea that for our thing we're doing in London, I think we should have a strand of it which is aimed exactly as you're suggesting at young women and girls to directly focus on this, saying you don't need to go down the patriarchal route. Right. Okay, we're going to move on to Cara then. So Cara Dansky is a lawyer, public speaker, and feminist. She served as president of WDI USA from 2021 to 2024 and on the board of Women's Liberation Front, WOLF, from 2016 to 2020. In 2023, she published The Reckoning: How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls, and she currently writes a Substack at The Turf Report. So thank you so much, Cara, for coming, and you're going to be talking to us about the history of the movement being important. I'm just going to get the title of your talk up, which I should have already had, but I didn't. So why the history of a movement is important. So thank you so much, Cara, and over to you, and call me back on when if you need me to come and chat to you.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And thanks for having me. So, as Joe just said, this is called Why the History of a Movement is Important: The Feminist Fight to Protect Women's Sex-Based Rights. And I published it on November 30th. And part of the reason I wrote this, and I will put a link to my Substack where it's free, there's no paywall or anything, and I will put a link to it when I'm done talking. And part of the reason I wrote this is that in many countries, including the US, loads more women are figuring out what's happening. They're finding men in their locker rooms. They're understanding about men and women's sports, and they are speaking out, which is so great. It's wonderful. And I do my absolute best to highlight them Fridays in a free weekly series I do called FFS Friday. And also, they don't realize, because they have no reason to know, that there's actually been a movement fighting back against this. And of course, the reason they don't know that is there's a media blackout, and most media outlets will not platform us or talk about us. So there's really no reason for them to know that women have been doing this for years, and even, more than decades. So I wrote a piece about it. And again, this is free. Please feel free to share it with anyone if ever you find it to be useful. Okay, and also, I was very sorry to hear Joe's news about Twiss Butler. Twiss spoke at the very first WDI USA convention in Washington, D.C. in 2022. She will be very missed. Relatedly, when I wrote this on November 30th, I said, this post is for Jules Kirk, a fierce woman and radical feminist who died on Thursday, November 27th. Jules was active in the Women's Liberation Front for many years. Bernadette, could I have the slides, please? This is Jules. Next slide, please. I assume that's her with her granddaughter. And the third slide, please. Jules and I used to chat on the phone frequently. I met her in Wolf, incidentally, and we met a few times in person. She was warm, thoughtful, and delightfully funny. She once sent me this pair of socks. Can you advance to the next slide? Okay, there are tons of women and girls who are finding their voices and speaking out. Bernadette, you can take down the slides if you'd like, unless you'd like to show my feminist socks, which you're welcome to continue doing if you'd like. There are tons of women and girls who are finding their voices and speaking out about recent assaults on women's sex-based rights to things like female-only sports, locker rooms, and prisons, which is great. I do my absolute best to document them in my weekly series, FFS Friday. As more and more women find their voices, I think it's important for them to know the history behind the movement. Feminists have been speaking out about this for a long time, but it's very difficult to know that for two reasons. One, the mainstream legacy media either ignores us completely, which is the norm, or paints us as stooges of the far right, which is the rare but very disingenuous exception to the norm. And two, the mainstream legacy media paints this entire fight as being between the big bad Christian right and a poor marginalized community that is just fighting for its civil rights, which is also completely disingenuous. It can be difficult for newcomers to believe that practically our entire society has caved to the idea that some men are women if they say so, if they adopt the stereotypes of femininity by wearing makeup, dresses, and high heels, or if they take hormones and or have surgeries to make them resemble women. But it's true. The easiest way through this is just to understand that as difficult as it is to believe, it's completely true. There's an entire billion-dollar industry behind all of this, but that's a story for a different day. On November 28th, Jennifer Say published a piece, and my written piece includes links to everything I reference, so you'll be able to find them. She published a piece titled "The History of the Movement to Protect Women's and Girls' Sex-Based Rights." This is important because it's important to understand history. A lot of people think this movement started with conservatives. That's understandable because of the media narratives and recent efforts under Trump 2.0, but it isn't true. In 1979, a lesbian radical feminist professor named Janice Raymond published a book titled The Transsexual Empire, essentially predicting everything that was to come. She republished it in 1994 with a new introduction about the emergence of a very dangerous word, transgender. She has generously made it available for free via a downloadable PDF. In 2014, a journalist, Michelle Goldberg, published an article in The New Yorker titled "What is a Woman? The Dispute Between Radical Feminism and Transgenderism." In it, she recounts an event in 1973 where a radical feminist named Robin Morgan said the following: "I will not call a male she. 32 years of suffering in this androcentric society and of surviving have earned me the title woman. One walk down the street by a male transvestite, 5 minutes of his being hassled, which he may enjoy, and then he dares to think he understands our pain. No, in our mother's names and in our own, we must not call him sister." That was 1973. Things really started to heat up in the early 1990s at Mitchfest, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, after a man who called himself a woman was removed. For decades, men held something called Camp Trans across the street from the festival, which was primarily for lesbians, but welcomed all women, the female kind. A lot of people think that Matt Walsh started the movement in 2022 by putting out a film titled "What is a Woman?", the same title as Michelle Goldberg's 2014 New Yorker article about radical feminists. That film was important, but it did not start the movement. I watched the whole film. Women's Declaration International USA published a review of it shortly after it came out. While all of this was happening, the following exchange occurred. Bernadette, could I have the final slide, please? So this is an exchange on X where Matt Walsh basically says, "Hey, I'm happy to work with anyone who will work with me to defeat transgenderism." And I replied to say, "Great, let's talk. To date, you have pretty much ignored us. Please see if you can get me on Daily Wire. Even better, get us both on a free platform." And I sent him a link to the WDI USA website. No response. And you can take those down, Bernadette. Thank you so much. In April of 2023, the Daily Wire claimed on X that the film, quote, "started a movement to protect women and children from radical gender ideology." At around that time, during an interview with The Spectator, The interviewer noted accurately that in the UK, it is predominantly leftist feminists who are leading the fight against gender identity, and asked if there are any such leftist feminists fighting the fight in the US. Walsh essentially answered that there are no leftist feminists fighting the fight in the US, and that all opposition to gender identity in the US is coming from conservatives. He knew he was lying. He knows who we are, and he knew it then. The Daily Wire has a lot of money, and I assume Walsh was paid for his work on the film. Most conservative activists in this fight are paid for their work. In contrast, the feminist group Women's Liberation Front was all volunteer for several years, though the group now has a handful of staff members who earn a modest salary. WDI USA has been all volunteer since 2020. Wolf was founded in 2013 as an unapologetically radical feminist organization. Its mission is to restore, protect, and advance the rights of women and girls through legal argument, policy advocacy, and public education. It believes, and here I'm quoting from Wolf website, it believes that female humans, the class of people called women, are oppressed by men under a system called patriarchy. That patriarchy is organized around the extraction of resources from female bodies and minds in the service of men, including reproductive, sexual, emotional, and labor resources. That gender is a hierarchical caste system that organizes male supremacy. Gender cannot be reformed, it must be abolished. That overlapping systems of injustice built on misogyny, racism, and wealth inequality must all be dismantled for all women to be free. WDI was launched in 2019 to advance the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights globally. The US chapter launched in 2020. The Declaration reaffirms women and girls' sex-based rights and challenges the discrimination we experience from the replacement of the category sex with that of gender identity. It has been signed by nearly 40,000 individuals from 160 countries and by 547 distinct organizations. One of its co-founders is a radical feminist lesbian named Sheila Jeffries. Hi, Sheila. Based in the UK. In 2014, she published a book titled Gender Hurts, whose back cover reads as follows. It is only recently that transgenderism has been accepted as a disorder for which treatment is available. In the 1990s, a political movement of transgender activism coalesced to campaign for transgender rights. Considerable social, political, and legal changes are occurring in response, and there is increasing acceptance by governments and many other organizations and actors of the legitimacy of these rights. This provocative and controversial book explores the consequences of these changes and offers a feminist perspective on the ideology and practice of transgenderism, which the author sees as harmful. It explores the effects of transgenderism on the lesbian and gay community, the partners of people who transgender, children who are identified as transgender, and the people who transgender themselves, and argues that these are negative. In doing so, the book contends that the phenomenon is based upon sex stereotyping, referred to as gender, a conservative ideology that forms the foundation for women's subordination. Gender Hurts argues for the abolition of gender, which would remove the rationale for transgenderism. Feminists have been at this for a long time. Someone recently told me that the Alliance Defending Freedom has been fighting for female-only sports in court longer than anyone. This is not accurate. Wolf sued the Obama administration over Obama's attempt to redefine sex to include gender identity in Title IX in 2016. The case was titled Women's Liberation Front versus United States of America. ADF's first involvement was Sewell versus Connecticut, filed first as an administrative complaint in 2019 and later as a legal complaint in 2020. The main reason ADF even got involved in the first place was a guy named Gary McCaleb, a retired ADF attorney. He and I met in 2018 during a meeting at the headquarters of the Trump 1.0 Department of Education. Incidentally, Trump 1.0 did nearly nothing to combat gender ideology. At the time, the first floor of the DOE's headquarters building was plastered with images of the genderbread person. If you don't know what that is, here you go, and I linked to it. The DOE official we met with flatly ignored our concerns. To his credit, Gary worked hard to persuade ADF leadership to get involved, and he once reached out to me for a quote from lesbian radical feminist Ruth Barrett's 2016 anthology, Female Erasure: What You Need to Know About Gender Politics, War on Women, the Female Sex, and Human Rights. The 2016 anthology includes 49 chapters by feminists who hail from the political left. It also contains a foreword by Germaine Greer, an Australian leftist feminist who has been speaking out about these matters since forever. In 1989, she published an article in The Independent titled "Why Sex Change is a Lie." And then I quote her saying, "Female is real and it's sex, and femininity is unreal and it's gender." A few years ago, Genevieve Gluck, who was active in Wolf for many years and co-founded the feminist magazine Redux, posted a 2015 video of someone interviewing Greer, which goes something like this. And here I'm paraphrasing Greer's interview. Greer: "It's misogyny." Interviewer: "Yeah, but doesn't that mean that some men don't feel like they're women?" Greer: "So what?" Interviewer: "Could you please be nicer?" Greer: "No, I'm sick of this shit." Interviewer: "If a man really, really, truly feels like a woman, can he be a woman?" Greer: "No." Interviewer: "Do you understand how people feel that's insulting?" Greer: "I don't care." Someone recently said on X that we would not be in this position if women had shown more boldness in 2020. The problem is not that we were insufficiently bold in 2020. The problem is that we were largely ignored. Here's a video of feminists speaking out in 2020. It was an event at the Seattle Public Library hosted by Wolf entitled "Fighting the New Misogyny, a Feminist Critique of Gender Identity." I promise we were bold. We had to work extremely hard to even make the event go forward because proponents of gender flippity flam tried to get it canceled. If you don't know what I mean by gender flippity flam, here's an explanation. Thanks to Dr. P on X for that phrase. Hundreds of people protested. The speakers had to be escorted to our car by the Seattle Police Department. Had they not escorted us to our car, we would likely have been trampled to death. In 2017, two radical feminists, Mary Lou Singleton and Miriam Ben Shalom, joined up with two conservative women on a panel titled "Biology Isn't Bigotry: Why Sex Matters in the Age of Gender Identity." That panel was thanks to Kaylee Triller, who I interviewed earlier this year for an episode of my podcast. A few years ago, she published an article in the Christian Post titled "Dear Christian Conservative Men, Please Stop Screwing Up the Trans Issue." She was taking to task the Christian conservative men, including Walsh, who sneer at the leftist women in the fight. She wrote, "It was largely women who stepped up to the plate to fight. They did so without fanfare and at great personal cost. And the women who impressed me the most in this capacity were women who had the most to lose, the radical feminists. It's one thing to speak an unpopular truth into a crowd of people who support your position. It's another thing entirely to stand up against your own tribe." And I just want to send a shout out and thank you to Kaylee for saying that. She was right, and her article is really worth a read. She's a powerful writer who lost her job at her local YMCA in 2015 for refusing to make the locker rooms all gender neutral. In 2018, Kelly J. Keane erected a billboard with the dictionary definition of woman on a building in Liverpool, England. She was forced to have it removed. Kelly J no longer calls herself a leftist feminist, but she did at the time. In early 2019, a bunch of women from Wolf did a panel at Heritage called "The Inequality of the Equality Act: Concerns from the Left." We got into heaps of trouble for it from women who didn't think we ought to be at the Heritage Foundation at all. But the only reason we held that event at the Heritage Foundation is that no other think tank in Washington would have us. In April of 2019, a leftist radical feminist named Julia Beck testified against the Equality Act in Congress. In 5 minutes, she laid out the entire leftist feminist case against gender identity. I watched the hearing live on C-SPAN. The Democratic men on the committee sneered at her the entire time. The Democratic women wouldn't look her in the eye. In May of 2019, I wrote email messages to the sister of Kamala Harris and the husband of Elizabeth Warren. I knew them both personally. I had worked with Kamala Harris's sister on Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Elizabeth Warren's husband was my property law professor in law school, and he and I had maintained a friendly email correspondence. I begged them to tell the two senators how disastrous gender identity is for women and girls as a sex class and for lesbians and gay men. I could provide countless more examples. The global feminist fight against gender flippity-flam and against the leftist parties and institutions that have been throwing women and girls under the bus up to 2023 is all documented and explained in a book I published that year titled The Reckoning: How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. It will be elaborated on in a forthcoming book titled Turflandia: How the Global Turban Will Win the Gender Wars. The history of this movement is important. It did not start in 2022 or even 2020. It started long before that. But the media narrative is either to pretend that feminists who fight back against gender flippity-flam don't exist, the norm, or that we're a tool of conservatives, on the rare exceptions when they pay attention to us at all. The entire problem, this entire time, is that hardly anyone listened to the feminists. If they had, the entirety of gender flippity-flam would have been thrown in the bin where it belongs by now. So, to all the women finding their voices, welcome. We're happy to have us, and we hope you find us. For Jules, I miss you, sis. Thank you. That's it, Joe, if you want to come back on.
Excellent. That's fantastic. That was really nice. And I think that shows just how good Kara's Substack is, that you can read stuff like this every week on the Substack. So, it's just a really clear voice, incredibly well written. And it's lovely to hear you reading it because I love the Germaine Greer bit. It's very, very good. I'm just going to share my screen for a second to show something that we've been doing, and this is partly related to what Lauren was saying. We've got on WDI, we have these things called shorts, and that's partly to try to get to younger women who are more likely to be watching Instagram and TikTok. And we've got some nice little shorts like this is a good one, The Ick Factor in Gay Male Culture by Sheila Jeffries, and a really good, clear bit of explaining from Carla Mantia, the birdcage model of oppression. And it's like about 20 seconds. So I think that's something that we should be doing more of, and maybe promoting these shorts. And I was thinking as Cara was talking, we could promote loads and loads of little clips. In fact, everybody, Alex, Lauren, and Cara. I'm just going to see if we've got a question for everybody. But what I'd suggest is, Bernadette, can we play the news from USA from Kerry Bruce, and then we'll get everybody back on for the last 10 minutes or last 12 minutes. We've got a interesting update on news from USA, and then we'll come back on.
That yesterday, WDI USA published a new article by Lesbian Bill of Rights International discussing the recent ban on puberty blockers for minors in New Zealand and what it means for lesbians. Also, both Kara and Jennifer Say recently published pieces on their respective Substacks about the history of the feminist fight to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and why that history is important. In her article, Kara pays tribute to Jules Kirk, who she describes as a fierce woman and radical feminist active in the women's liberation movement for many years, who died on November 27th. Moving on to the news. For those who haven't yet heard, Helen Weberly, founder of the highly controversial telemedicine Gender GP, has recently expanded her mail order hormone empire to the US. As Leanne Owen writes for the LGBT Courage Coalition Substack, it's ostensibly a subscription hormone service for over 18s. Fill out a form, speak to a remote clinician, get prescriptions routed through cooperating pharmacies. Mind you, this is the outfit that built its brand by aggressively medicalizing gender-distressed teenagers, drawing harsh criticism from regulators. Although it's nominally adults only, you have to wonder about a lightly regulated mail order system run by people who have never hidden their enthusiasm for peddling these drugs to minors. Leanne notes that the recent Spectator column titled Helen Weberly is Terrifying examines her US expansion as an example of how lightly regulated telemedicine can be used to dodge the very safeguards other countries are scrambling to build, and that her promotional sit-downs with, for example, Helen Joyce and Julie Bindel are absolutely devastating, not only to rational, reality-based people, but to the very ideologues she apparently had hoped her interviews would impress. Since 2020, when the Supreme Court ruled in Bostock versus Clayton County that discrimination on the basis of a person's transgender status in the employment context violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, without defining what it meant by the term transgender or transgender status. Kara and others have been calling for the court to clean up the mess its decision created. Despite multiple opportunities, it has failed to do so, most recently in the case of U.S. versus Scrimetti. It's possible the court will address the issue when it decides the two sports cases next year, but if not, Kara has recently written about two other cases that seem likely to force the federal judiciary to reckon with the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock. In the first, MetaReader versus Noam, a male TSA employee who claims to be female is suing the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, alleging discrimination because he is not allowed to pat down female passengers or use the women's restroom. The second case, Withrow versus United States of America, brought by a male member of the Illinois National Guard who claims womanhood, and on behalf of a class of federal employees similarly situated, alleges employment discrimination because he is not allowed to use the women's bathroom at work. In Kara's view, both of these cases put the question of what the Supreme Court meant by transgender and transgender status in 2020 directly before the federal judiciary, and it's hard to see how it can be avoided when discrimination in the employment context is precisely what they are about. Another case Kara recently highlighted involves parents in Colorado who are suing the Jefferson County School District after their 11-year-old daughter was forced to share a bed with a boy during an overnight school-sponsored trip. Per the original complaint, for school trips, Jefferson County Public Schools tells parents that girls will be roomed together on one floor and boys will be roomed together on a different floor. But what the district fails to mention is that they have redefined the words girl and boy to mean a student's asserted gender identity rather than sex. Having lost at the district level, the parents are now seeking relief at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. On the 26th, evolutionary biologist Colin Wright published an interesting essay in the Washington Examiner titled, "Activists Are Redefining Gender to Save a Collapsing Narrative." His piece was in response to one published a week prior in the San Francisco Chronicle titled, "We're Scientists Who Study Sex and Gender. Here's What Trump Gets Wrong About Trans People," which is presented as an expert rebuttal to Trump's executive order defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government, as well as to the follow-up Health and Human Services guidance that included a detailed set of definitions for sex-related terms. Of note, as Glenna Goldis points out on X, both scientists are men who pretend to be women, a conflict of interest the authors did not disclose. Wright felt the San Francisco Chronicle piece was important to highlight because it attempts to redefine the entire debate landscape on sex and gender, marking a major shift in activist rhetoric. What he is referring to is the author's apparent acceptance of the binary definition of sex. Males make small gametes, sperm, females make large gametes, ova. That is immediately followed by their extraordinary claim that beyond gamete size, everything else, including secondary sex characteristics, body size, shape, color, behavior, and social roles, is gender. Wright posits that this rhetorical pivot is happening because activists are losing the debate on sex and are trying to salvage their ideological project and related medical scandal by appearing reasonable on basic sex biology while hiding the pseudoscience in their new broad meaning of gender. And finally, as many of you may have heard, at the 2025 official Strongman World Championships held in Texas last week, a man claiming to be a woman was initially awarded the title of World's Strongest Woman. When his ruse was discovered, the governing body, to its credit, swiftly disqualified him, restored the title to rightful winner Andrea Thompson, and in a statement indicated that all athlete points and places will be altered accordingly to ensure that the rightful places are allocated to each of the women's open athletes. Upon this reversal, Andrea posted a statement on Instagram, and her words are worth noting in their entirety. I am grateful to the team for reaching out to me, investigating and rectifying the situation so quickly, honoring the title to me, which is something we just don't see in any other sport that has faced a similar position. This means that we, as a community, are taking a stand, protecting women's sports as we have fought so hard for. Whilst I cannot say it won't ever happen again, I am confident that we will work something out to prevent it in the future. For now, ladies, keep showing up, take up space, be loud, be much.
Oh, great, brilliant. Well, so let's get everybody back on. That was very good. Thanks very much, Kerry, who's here today, as well as having made the video. And then we'll just discuss any points that came up or any further questions. So there's a question in the Q&A, which I'm going to read out, which seems like a good place to start, and then we can see where we go from there. So it's a question from Diane Lee Liu. So it is this: the next generation is deeply influenced by short form videos like TikTok. As far as I know, most of that content is generated by AI. These AI models are created by men who reinforce patriarchal society, and they trained the AI model heavily on misogynistic data sets. From my own experience training AI models, I've seen that they're also contaminated by the videos of sexually abused girls. How can we possibly protect women and children when they spread harmful content faster than we can counter it? Right, so I guess if we all probably unmute ourselves, we can see if anybody's got any ideas about that.
I don't really, I mean, I'm not on TikTok, and I realize there are benefits to being on TikTok and generating shorts, as you say, to reach younger women. That's probably a great way forward. I have not really wanted to take on a whole new platform. I don't know if Lauren or Alex has anything more useful to say.
I'm on TikTok neither, and so are my daughters. I think it's a battle we would only lose. Like, they can create AI shorts so fast. I don't know if it's really effective to try to keep up with that.
I Personally, I think our best effort would be really to reaching mothers. That's been my experience. Mothers have the most direct access to their children and the most influence up to a certain point. If we can, that's really where I see the only way. I've given up on the education system, but if we could also maybe get something in the actual education system regarding women's history, real history, then maybe we can light that spark in girls to get them to see this before it happens.
I think that I totally agree. I mean, I tend to think that school in itself, obviously it's quite good. They learn things like reading and stuff, but a lot of it is taking children away from their mothers and then the state being able to educate them in, for instance, trans ideology. We've seen that in Britain, that by stopping the power or the possibility of parents to actually bring their children up, they can get in there and groom them. And that happens so quickly. And luckily, there's a bit of a pushback. But reaching mothers, and then mothers, I guess mothers might have some wisdom. They might have started to experience the patriarchy. So rather than, yeah, I mean, I'll say about AI that I think, like lots of things, it would be great if we could, if there are bits of it that we could use. And one thing that well, I noticed, and I guess a few of us have noticed, is that Grok, which, as far as I understand, is the Elon Musk answer to Wikipedia, got AI to do a very long, probably 10,000 word summary of, or not summary, a piece on Grok about WDI, and it's a million times better than the trans activists who run Wikipedia, who are pernicious, vile, misogynistic snakes. And every time we try and make Wikipedia better to not say vile things about us, they change it. Whereas Grok just actually has trawled the internet and created a really good summary of everything we've done really quickly. So I would say AI is very, very bad, like what the has been suggested, but there are some yeah, so someone here is saying Grok's the best AI. I mean we can't it could turn against us very easily, just it could just as quickly as it produced that thing about WDI, it could make one that was totally against us. So it's a massive amount of power in some probably misogynistic's hands. Right. Any other points then? So let's maybe go back to everybody and see if there were other things you thought of or wanted to say. So Alex, did you see any questions or get thought of anything extra you thought would be useful to say?
Mm. Someone asked whether disabled women can meet among themselves, and I answered that we do, but organized privately. And I think they haven't dared so far to forbid women with psychiatric disabilities together without men, and I don't think they would. So yes, there is some women-only groups available, at least in that. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this in Germany?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And Lauren, how about you? Have you seen anything in the chat or thought of anything else to add?
I guess I saw some commentary about male allies, and I'm not a supporter of men, but I do think that they're going to have to be a part because men, they only listen to each other, and that's at least been my experience. And also I think there's a lot of sort of handmaiden or groomed girls, women who also tend to listen to men more than women. So if we could get some healthy male allies who can speak to what's happening specifically in gender, but also with patriarchy, maybe that's an area that we could reach.
Yeah. What about you, Cara? What do you think on that? Or on other things?
Well, what I was going to say was that when Joe invited me to read that talk, which I wrote not as a talk, but as a written piece, I was very happy to do it. But I don't want anyone here to think that I was educating anyone. In reading that to WDI, I realized I'm preaching to the choir and literally in some instances reading Sheila's words to herself and telling Ruth about the book that she herself wrote in 2016. So it wasn't written for this audience. It was written for the several thousand people. I mean, I have a very small paid subscription rate. Very few people pay me for my paid work, but several thousand people subscribe on a free basis. And so that went to several thousand normies, as we might say. And so I just think it's so important that people understand that feminists have been doing this for decades.
Yeah. When we talk about men, where something I think when Cara was talking, I wrote this thing that's I think this is about men. It's so because you were mentioning that the well, trans activists, right-wing men and left-wing men, basically don't want to debate us, and they won't, like say Matt Walsh would just ignored you and don't debate us. And then what I wrote is this: some men, like cameramen, come into the wilds of feminist lands and they make documentaries about us. Their documentaries get widely viewed, and we remain largely ignored. And I think this is I think some other feminists have sort of said this that we're actually like wild creatures, and some men with cameras come and set up hides and get to know us and make friends with us so that they can see how we interact in feminist land, and they make documentaries about this. They get like 50,000 views talking about what the feminists are doing. And I feel like yeah, to some extent it's better that they're getting our ideas out, and they are to some extent helping, but then there is also, I am cynical about the sort of the balance where if we say something, nobody listens, or we don't get much of an audience. Whereas if a man says exactly the same thing, and even our ally men are much more likely to be listened to than us. And then just about that thing about men, that we did have a few men who used to come to these webinars, and there was one man who I think in the first year there was one man who came quite a lot. And I thought, well, he isn't doing much harm, stupidly. And then I got an email from some Australians who know him who said, can you please ban, I can't remember his name, this man, because he goes to your webinars, gathers information, makes out he's friends with you all, and then uses that information to try and like groom or, like to ingratiate himself with women to make himself look good. He's a real pain in the ass. Please, can you ban him? So we did. And I mean, we should have probably just banned all men straight away at the beginning, but and I think say Sheila Jeffries, that various people would have said, have it women only anyway, because there's this disruptive influence of men. So I think whilst Lauren, your point is definitely right. We're going to need men to help us overthrow patriarchy, and some men are really on for it. They want to help, but it's also great to have these women only spaces where we can really speak and don't feel sort of we just don't feel their presence.
For sure. I would not want men on this call. I wouldn't, but I could think their influence could maybe help the next generation, like through their sons, and even pointing out to their daughters behaviors that they themselves know they have repeated and that kind of thing. But it takes I know it takes, I think, years and years of hard introspective work for men to even realize what specifically they do. They are so entitled to their behavior that a lot of them will never see it.
Yeah. Well, look, it's 31, so we've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much to Alex and Lauren and Cara and everybody here. It's just been a delight and really interesting. It's just amazing that we meet every week. It's just find out new things and it's interesting. And new ideas and developments and a way forward and very encouraging. So thanks a lot to everybody.